stress. People say stress ages you, but does stress really age you? Does stress result in a premature death? Well, new evidence proves that this is exactly the case. Okay, so there was an article called Psychological and Biological Resilience Modulates the Effect of Stress on Epigenetic Aging. So simply put, stress does age you. Stress does make you die prematurely. But it's not so much the stress, but your reaction to stress that matters, all right? So the article is by Zachary M. Harvanak, Nia Fogelman, Ki Zhu, and Rajita Sinha, okay? Published on the 27th of November, 2021, okay? So we have here, our society is experiencing more stress than ever, leading to both negative psychiatric and physical outcomes. Chronic stress is linked to negative long-term health consequences, raising the possibility that stress is related to accelerated aging. In this study, we examined whether resilience factors affect stress-associated biological age acceleration. Okay, and they go into a lot of detail about it. So if you want, you can find that's in nature.com. It's also in translational psychiatry. Okay. And they're going to talk about Grimmage and all of that stuff, okay? It's quite long, so I think I'll just pop over here to an easier article to summarize. It's kind of summarizing this in a similar, easier way. This is sciencealert.com. Psychological resilience is linked to how much stress messes with your body, okay? So the first thing that you've been thinking, that's kind of like everybody knows that stress ages you, is proved, okay? But it's what you do with that or how you react to stress that matters. Let's take a quick look in here, okay? Okay, so, all right. So these are researchers from Yale University. Chronic stress is linked to negative long-term health consequences. Okay, the team focused their efforts on epigenetic clocks. So this, is, by the way, is Science Alert, and this was 7 December 2021, Jacinta Bowler. Okay. Epigenetic clocks. Epigenetic clock is basically the body's own genetic clock, because you can see two people, one person 70 and they look ancient, another person 70 look middle-aged. How can that possibly be? They've both been on the planet for 70 years, but one person is biologically aging faster than the other person, because what your body does is you're going through cellular rejuvenation. And there's some cells which don't change, namely the cells of your heart and the cells of your brain. But most cells in the body actually do regenerate, and it's generally seen as every 7 years you regenerate all the cells in your body. Might be exactly like that, but the cells in the body are rejuvenating all the time. The fastest to regenerate are skin cells, which is about 30 days, and some are over a period of years, but they do regenerate all the time. For example, shins, your shin bones, every time you hit the ground, you're cracking your shins slightly, and they regenerate quite rapidly, for example. So who you are right now, let's say as a being, is beyond your body. The body you're walking around with now is largely being replaced quite a bunch of times. If you've been like, if you're in your teens, you've probably replaced most cells of your body a couple of times. If you're in your, say, 50s or 60s, you might have replaced maybe 7, 8 times. You've regenerated most of your body, okay? Not every part of your body, most of your body, right? So the epigenetic clock idea is that but basically what creates aging is that the cells reproduce, and some cells reproduce after a few days, some cells after months, etc. But when they reproduce, they should reproduce an identical cell, and then they die off, okay? So this cellular regeneration, and the problem is that little defects at genetic level occur, and aging is basically a genetic disorder. If we could cure this genetic disorder, we would never age. And technically speaking, unless we get hit by a bus, which would probably happen if you live long enough, we should be able to live for hundreds and hundreds of years until eventually something nasty happens, like we fall down the stairs and break our neck, we get hit by a truck, we're in a plane crash, whatever, something like that. But in theory, you should be able to live forever if you could stop this genetic aging. And this is the epigenetic clock. So from our point of view, is we can't, at this stage, cure aging, but maybe in 100 years, 200 years, who knows? But can we slow down the epigenetic clock? And I know somebody might also say, well, we've all got age anyway, we're all going to die. But there's a difference between, do you want to say live to 70 and be in terrible health for 50 or for say 20 years, or do you want to live to 70 in good health for that time? So what they do to check the epigenetic clocks, or a way of checking this, they look at a set of DNA methylation markers. As it says here, these markers provide a pretty accurate estimation of biological age. Now, the methylation markers are attached to every DNA, so you can just take somebody's blood and you can check these markers. And they have, there's different ways of checking, and so they end up using a thing called grimmage, okay? Which sounds pretty depressing, but anyway. So the researchers looked at 444 adults between 18 and 50 in New Haven, USA. They were given questionnaires which asked about cumulative stress, self-control, current health. Then blood samples were taken to do the grimmage methylation check and measure insulin resistance and adrenaline sensitivity. The team found that cumulative stress was associated with change in methylation. Okay, older cells are obviously, people who are having more stress are having older cells. So that's the first thing. Is stress aging you? Is stress making you die prematurely? And the answer is yes, it is. So these results support the popular notion that stress makes us age faster. One of the researchers, Yale psychiatry researcher Zachary Harvanek, said. But they also suggest a promising way to possibly minimize these adverse consequences of stress through strengthening emotional regulation and self-control. Self-control and emotional regulation aren't exactly easy skills to develop, but they can be taught and matured over time. And if stressing less isn't an option, working on these skills might be a way to limit the adverse effects. Interestingly, though, they also found that not everyone who had chronic stress levels had the same issues. Those who were good at emotional regulation and self-control, two factors of emotional resilience, by the way, seem to have less these negative effects. So the psychiatry researcher, Zachary Harvanek, says here, these results do support the notion that stress makes us age faster, but they also suggest a promising way to possibly minimize the adverse consequences of stress through strengthening emotion regulation and self-control, okay? Self-control and emotion regulation aren't easy skills to develop, but they can be taught and matured over time, okay? So this is the important thing. Stress is aging you, stress is making you die prematurely, but people who are good at emotional regulation and self-control seem to age less. Well, this is an interesting question. It goes on to say that it's still early days. It says, this is just early research. When scientific research just can't go by one piece of research. You have to look at multiple research from multiple people, because you can get an unusual group of people. That cohort of 400 could be unusual. It could be outliers. We don't know unless this is replicated over time, but it does give some interesting food for thought. They go on to say that nonetheless, the study is the first to identify a clear relationship between cumulative stress and grimmage acceleration in a healthy population, which suggests that stress may play a role in accelerated aging even prior to the onset of chronic disease. And that's a real bingo one for you guys. Stress plays a role in accelerated aging prior to chronic disease. The real way of avoiding disease is to stop it from happening. Prevention is better than cure. So before you get really wasted, if you can stop it. So if you can see the indicators early on and stop it. But what they're suggesting here is not just that you can see the indicators, but you can look at the lifestyle, and not just the lifestyle, but you can go further back and look at the attitude, okay? So we all know that having a very unhealthy lifestyle is not going to be good for us, but the attitudes. Now they're talking about stress, but it's probably logical to assume that you'd probably find, if you did similar research on things like even people who are eating unhealthy, drinking unhealthy, etc. So for example, my wife has an uncle who smoked very heavily all his life. He's now 70 plus and he's very, very healthy. And his attitude is always extremely positive. Now, of course, the cigarette smoking is very bad for him. And maybe he has good DNA for handling cigarette smoking. But still, his attitude is very good. So attitude is always number one in life. Now, that doesn't mean you should have a crazy lifestyle, but attitude is terribly important. So again, they say here at the end of this article, notably, this relationship was strongly moderated by resilience factors, including self-control and emotional control, okay? So the paper is published in Translational Psychiatry. As I said here, it is also published over in Nature, which is the biggie for science. If Nature publishes a very good, solid scientific article. So I think what's very interesting, what we could take out of this is an emotionally resilient person will tend to age slower. That means they're less likely going to go and get chronic disease. They're more likely to get chronic disease later rather than earlier. Because you're getting less chronic disease or chronic disease later, you're more likely to live longer and you're more likely to have quality of life for longer, okay? And the two interesting things he said there was emotion regulation and also self-control. See here? Those who are good at emotional regulation and self-control. So they're two different things. So self-control is somebody cut you up in traffic and you want to jump out of your car and beat them up, or at least shout at them, but you hold it in a bit, okay? So in other words, you don't get too carried away. If you look at any of these reality TV shows, Big Brother, all these sort of type shows, where they put people in a house and they're all like, you know, reality TV shows are all going bananas. And I think what they do is they purposely select people that don't like each other. They psychologically profile, and you know, that candidate A and candidate B, they'll hate each other. It's going to make great TV. But they're also looking for people who emote. They're looking for people who go into it in excess. You see this sometimes when people get hysterical over a situation. I'm not saying you shouldn't vent your emotions, but going more and more and more into the grief, or more and more and more into the remorse, or more and more and more into the outrage, or whatever it is. And we shouldn't repress ourselves, but sometimes people can languish too long. And all that languishing, okay, it's good if it's releasing something, but remember, when you get really upset, your body releases, it releases cortisol, adrenaline is increased, and these are designed for a short period of time. You're supposed to have fight or flight. A fight or flight is basically that, say you're in an accident, for example, or you're in a fight, and your body releases adrenaline to deal with the fight or to deal with the accident, and cortisol as well. And they're very, very good for a few hours. But if you're continually stressed and stressed and stressed and emotional, then those rates are high all the time. And effectively, it's kind of burning you out really rapidly. And it's putting a lot of oxidation, a lot of stress in those cells. The other thing is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is being like more on an even trough rather than up and down, up and down. Now, how can you do that? Or what is it? Well, first of all, is in general, so self-control is you might be very emotional, but you're not completely losing it. And regulation basically means that in general, your emotions are fairly regulated, okay? So what matters there is that we have to try and balance ourselves, all right? So those two, you'll find that in Science Alert. You'll also find the Translational Psychiatry in the actual article there in Nature as well. The actual article is Psychological Biological Resilience Modulates the Effects of Stress and Epigenetic Aging, published 27 November 2021. So I know it could be difficult. It depends where you are in your life right now. It depends what life situations are happening with you right now. And there are times when it's very difficult, but there's times when it's not. So we could all have a rough month. We can all have a rough year, but a rough life, there must be some times when things aren't so hard. So I do understand sometimes your life is turbulent. You're out in the sea emotionally and all sorts of things are happening. And it's just hanging on, battling down the hatches, trying not to go under. But there's many times in our life when things are relatively smooth. And okay, something crazy has happened in your life. Maybe it's very hard to be emotionally regulated, hard to be in control. But what about, is that like all the time? And if it's all the time, you have to question about what way you're leading your life or what choices you're making. But for most of us, we do have years and months and weeks and days that are not so bad. And how do we move towards more of a balanced path so we're more regulated? Because the stress is literally killing you. But particularly, it's the being stressed, okay? So while they're talking about those attributes of self-control and emotional regulation, the bigger picture, we pull back and get the bigger picture. The bigger picture is emotional maturity. Being able to deal with life situations. And we can get the bigger picture again and go further back and look at attitudes and how our attitudes have an effect upon our life. And really that, say, for example, in your situation, and a lot of people have this, it's not so dramatic, but it's very, very common, okay? You're in a family and you've got to put your kids to school, kids to college, you're doing a side hustle, you've got elderly parents, you're constantly stressed, or you're a young person in school or college and you're always studying, or a young person in a career situation and you seem to work very, very long hours. And you're in a situation that you can't just back out. You can't just back out of your responsibilities as a family member to pay the bills or your college studies or your career. You can't. You can't just say, oh, I can't just relax. I've got to do this. But one thing you can do is just go with the flow. Okay. There's many things on this channel where we talk about how to, reflect and develop emotional maturity and so on. But one thing I want you to take away from this video is at least this one little thing. I can be in a stress situation and I can choose not to be stressed. That's a powerful thing. Now, of course, we can't fully be de-stressed because we're in a stressful situation. But what I'm saying is your attitude is the most important thing. So just think again. Stress will definitely age you and make you die prematurely. Lifestyle factors will definitely age you and make you die prematurely. Our attitudes towards what's happening will stress us and age us, okay? So maybe you can't do much with your lifestyle, but you can do a lot with how you react to it. And although you mightn't be today able to be a really emotionally mature person who's able to deal with everything, you can at least change your attitude. Your attitude is something you change like that. Attitude is a moment-by-moment decision that you make. And what we can do is we can just go with the flow. Because what I feel a lot of the time we do, I mean, I'll give you an example. We used to have a willow tree outside our house. And in stormy weather, I see all these like big oaks and all sorts of trees snapping like twigs. But I would see our willow tree going like this, a willow tree going like that, and boom, okay? I never heard of a willow tree getting knocked over, very, very rare. Willow tree is this gangly kind of tree, and it just goes with the flow. And that's what we can do. Try your best to go with the flow. It will definitely reduce the effects of stress. I hope you liked this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.